It's nice to meet those that I haven't met before. Um, I am leading this November huddle, topic being redefining success after athletics. So I'll start by just doing an introduction about myself. Then I'm going to get into the importance of why redefining success after athletics is so critical. The third thing we're going to walk through all together, like I said, it's an interactive session. So we're going to do some practicing of your current life and considering what are those areas of opportunities that you can explore. And lastly, we'll commit to one thing that you want to enhance in your life and making one commitment to make the most effective progress forward. Okay, so jumping into the introduction. Like I said, I'm Kelsey Wiechman. I played a variety of sports growing up, but truly my primary sport was being a hockey goalie. I played for a D3 college in Minnesota. In fact, all of my corporate career has been as a corporate professional, and I just left that role last year. So most of my life I had been at a Fortune 50 company, anything from working the retail operations to human resources to global supply chain. That has really been my background. And in about 2020, the early 2020s, just had this calling to help support former athletes. So in 2022, I got certified to be a coach, and I founded After the Jersey Coaching. So my mission is to support athletes as they transition out of their sport and into what is next. I help them navigate a new identity and a new definition of success, which is obviously very related to this topic. And just as one other note, earlier this year, I became a coach for Athlete Soul. So I know I've been observing these huddles for a while, but got more involved in this organization. So I'm really thrilled to be leading this huddle. I think we all talk about how important it is for athletes to redefine success, but there's a lot of complexities to it and a lot of reasons why. So I've really distilled these down into two critical pieces. The first is athletes have spent their whole lives striving to be the best in their sport. And once they're no longer competing, they lack direction and purpose. And, likely former athletes are going to be dwelling on the past and agonizing over what could have been, blaming external factors. Instead, what they need to do is assess where they are now and where they want to go. So this gives them direction and that purpose that they would have lost when they were in their sport. So the second reason, success in sports is pretty easy to define. As opposed to in life, success is really ambiguous. It's hard to know if you're doing it right, if you're on the right track. So while playing sports, there are really clear measures. For example, scoring a goal, winning the game, maybe lifting heavier weights. But life doesn't have those clear measures. And even if there were such a thing as these perfectly defined clear measures, it's hard to single out that one clear thing to be putting all of your energy towards. So, at best, if you decide that as a human, you really value friendship and that is the one thing that you want to be really great at, it's really hard to define. What does a good friend mean? How do you know that you're being a good friend? How can you improve towards being a better friend? So, with all of those things, that's why athletes have a really hard time defining what success is in life and striving to be a little bit, for improvement. So, even though it's important for athletes and former athletes to redefine success, it's helpful. It's just a helpful practice at any stage of life because our lives are constantly changing and evolving. So that's why, as part of this, we're going to now go through a tool to assess your life and identify where you might want to make some improvements. So if you haven't already, please grab a pen and paper. And I'm going to, just as kind of part of a coaching ritual, I'm going to have us all close our eyes if you feel inclined. We're going to take a few deep breaths, kind of get into this, out of this mode of just listening to Kelsey talk, and instead get into more of a exploratory, exploratory state within your own selves. So I'm going to do this. I invite you to do the same. We'll take 2 deep breaths. Okay. So I will jump into this tool. From your piece of paper, draw a path, and you can make it look like this. You can make it look whatever you want it to look like. And then write along this path these aspects of your life. So take a few minutes and jot that down. Now, next to each one of those aspects of your life, I'll have you rate your satisfaction. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied are you currently with these aspects of your life? Okay, we'll move on to the next piece. This is going to go 1 layer deeper. I'll have you rate, right next to each of these aspects, anything that are feeding you with a smiley face, anything that drains you with a frowning face, anything that you're wrestling with an X, anything that is stretching or challenging you with 2 arrows, and anything you're hiding from with a kind of based on everything that you just walked through. I'd love if anyone would be willing to share something they've learned, maybe something that surprised them, anything that they'd like to share with the group.
I thought it was interesting to think about the difference between things that drain you and things that drain me, and then things that I'm wrestling with. Just kind of, separating out how I define those things. And that was interesting because everything that I'm wrestling with doesn't necessarily drain me. But it was interesting to think of it that way.
Did you have some that maybe hit both wrestling with and draining you and feeding you, or kind of some polar opposites? Did you have that situation?
Yes, I had a few of those too.
So my name's Megan, and I thought this was a really fun exercise because what surprised me was how high my numbers were on like a majority, I would say, of my areas. But knowing that when I was an athlete transitioning away, it looks completely different than what I used to be, right? So if I think about as an athlete going through transition and right after transition, my scores would have been extremely low, I think, on most of these areas. And I think what surprised me is how high they are now. Mind you, I'm very far away from those transition years, but it made me realize how it takes time and with a lot of effort and attention towards building up these areas, I've been able to get them up. I still have a couple of low areas that I am stretching myself in. But that was just reassuring to know that like I put a lot of time and attention and thoughtfulness into developing these areas. And over time, I've been able to get them really quite high to a point where I'm actually surprised that they're as high as they are. So that makes me feel good. It's like been a journey.
Yeah, that's great. Do you think if you were to have done this right out of transitioning out of being an athlete, um, besides having low scores, what other unexpected things do you think you would have observed?
I think it would have helped me identify areas to put my immediate attention towards. Whereas I felt like when I first retired, I was a little overwhelmed with everything. And I really felt like I was starting from scratch again. And that was a sort of a helpless feeling and like didn't really know where to go from there. And so I think that this would give me some areas to focus on, which would give me some agency and some control over, my what I was, give me some goals to work towards. So I think that would have been really helpful.
Great. Thank you for sharing, Megan. I'll give one last chance for anyone else to chime in.
There's also something in the chat, Kelsey. that Casey added. I'm not sure if you're able to see that.
I'm not.
Um, so it says, love the ability to identify specific weak points and areas of dissatisfaction. It's not enough to know you're struggling. You've got to be able to enumerate it. People can't help you if you can't provide specific info.
That's great. Thanks, Casey. So taking one aspect that you really would like to enhance, so that might be family or significant other, one area that either is low or somewhere in the middle range that you'd like to expand more is going to be the next part of this tool. You can either flip your page over or get a new piece of paper for this next part. So based on that aspect that you'd like to improve, we're going to set an intention. So when you think about this aspect, what do you want to enhance? I'll ask a few questions to kind of explore this to create your statement. What is the overall outcome you want to experience? And phrase it in a way that you could state it as if it's already been achieved. So, for example, I am creating, I am living, I am experiencing, and then filling in the rest of that statement with the outcome that you want to achieve. So when you've got your statement, write it at the top of your page. And the next piece of this is drawing a wheel large enough to be able to fit some writing inside of each piece. And we're going to creatively explore ways to achieve this desired outcome. So I'm going to ask a series of questions, and the idea is to fill out this whole wheel. Now, if you get really creative and you really come up with a lot, please don't limit yourself. Draw them anywhere, write them anywhere on the page. Just make sure to be capturing them. So I'll start with the first, and I'm going to take my time because you might have some ideas. You might come up with a few different options as I go. What is the smallest action you can take to achieve this outcome? And then you're writing it in one of those pie pieces. The next is, what would your 5-year-old self do? What do you want to do, but don't know if you are quite ready? And I'll pause on this one, just kind of a grounding. This can be as big and audacious or as small and minor as you'd like. I'm not gonna force you to the fire to do any of these things, but rather this mode is just this, the intention is to come up with some creative options, just to explore what are some possibilities. The next question is, what would inspire you to do? I'll ask the next one, which is, what would you do that would align with your values? The next is, what would you need others to assist in making it happen? What have you seen others do that you'd like to try? And the last two questions I have are, what would be the hardest thing to do? And on the flip side, what would be the very easiest thing for you to do? So the hope would be you've got quite a few different options laid out in front of you of things that you could do to creatively achieve this desired outcome you've stated at the beginning. Now, I invite you to go back and read each of those and rate them on a scale of 1 to 10. How willing are you to take that action? Like I said, I wasn't forcing you to take any of these actions. The idea is to be as creative as possible, but now getting a little more realistic with yourself of what are you willing to do. I'll just share some observations from other sessions I've done this in. I always seem to notice when I ask the question about what would your 5-year-old self be, there's kind of this smile, this playfulness of it. And I like hearing people's examples of, oh, as a 5-year-old, this is how I would approach it, which isn't always the case for, once we're older and adults in our lives.
For me, for my easiest thing and the smallest action I could take were the same. So then when I read both of those, I'm like, why don't you just do it at first? And my 5-year-old self would not care and just have fun is what I had put in my goal was around just finances and organizing, right? So I was like, I wouldn't have really cared about that as a 5-year-old. And I also just noticed about, in terms of being inspired, right? It's like if you can have that vision of your future self, if you can get clarity on that, right? That can be very inspirational of having an idea of where you want to be, at least, even if you don't know exactly how you're going to get there.
Cohen, since you're willing to share, I won't put you too much on the spot, but were there anything that you found that you were not willing to do and just kind of okay with that?
Not for this topic, but I could imagine for others that there may have been some things that I was not willing to do. Yeah, not for this topic.
Anyone else?
I think, Kelsey, what's interesting for me is that I guess I look at it with a matter of time. So like Cohen said, like the easiest thing to do, they're sort of the things you do straight away because they perhaps don't take as much time and you can tackle it pretty quickly. For the things that are harder, it's not that they're not going to get done. I think it's more that it requires more time and so more commitment from yourself, to be able to complete that. And I would look at it on like what I've done through my whole life and we did as athletes is like how can I break that down to smaller pieces so that actually it is feasible. And then over time you become like Megan, where you arrive at a certain point and you feel, okay, yeah, I've made progress on this, but because I've chipped at it a little bit time after time.
Yeah, one other observation I'll share is it's possible that as you start to make progress towards a certain goal, it might change. And if you try and tackle that big thing right away, you might be going down the wrong path. So instead, just making those little incremental steps along the way, you might be able to better pivot on your journey. Observation. Sometimes when I ask the question about what's the hardest thing to do, I've occasionally asked it as, what is the worst thing you could do? And again, that usually gets a chuckle of, yeah, the worst thing I could do would be, X, Y, and Z. And it almost unlocks another area of thinking, oh, what if I did the opposite of this thing I shouldn't do? That's a whole nother creative way of exploring. So moving on, I'll have you choose now simply one of these statements, these action items, and so narrowing down to just that one action step. And I know I'll speak from personal experience, but maybe as former athletes, we all feel this. Being an overachiever, I like to say, oh, I rated all of these really high on my willingness. I'm going to take them all. I'll just tackle them all. I'll just knock them out. And what I found is the most effective way to make progress is to take small incremental steps along the way instead of taking it all on and then you're trying to juggle too many things. So I'm really encouraging you to simply pick one for this next and final part. Okay, lastly, as I said, picking the one action item that you're going to commit to doing. And by when setting for yourself by when are you going to take this action? And the last piece is, how do you know that you've done it? So I'll just offer that, as I was mentioning, by making these meaningful steps towards your goals, even if they're small and seemingly insignificant, this is what you're doing to redefine and achieve success in life after you're an athlete, or after you make any transition in your life, or as you're experiencing adulthood and just navigating your life. Lastly, I'll just offer, if anyone needs some accountability, I know this one of, how do I know I've accomplished my goal, or how do I know, or what are some tactical things you can do? I'm happy to be an accountability buddy for anyone. If you want to email me, I would be happy to be a little accountability buddy. My email is right here after the jersey at gmail.com. And that is the end of kind of my share out the tools. But again, I will open it up to anyone that has some reflection or just wants to share what they've observed.
Kelsey, I wanted to share that I really appreciate you taking the time to like dive into some really hard questions because you know this life goes really quickly, and I think we don't always have the time to set an hour aside to actually do this kind of work, and quite frankly it takes more time than just an hour. But I think you're preaching to the choir with this group, because we have a lot of our coaches here who are convinced by this work and probably have done a lot of it. I wanted to see if anybody, and you included, like if you have done this work with athletes and have some comments and example to share about how they have reacted to it. I know that in our group coaching program, we do portion of this in different ways, but essentially the goal is the same. It really to learn about yourself and where you're going and what are your priorities, and how we put it, you know, break it down into smaller pieces. And like you said, I think sometimes it's really overwhelming for someone who is just retired to even consider those questions. And so I just wanted to put it to the group to see what have you observed with athletes in transition with this type of work, and any advice on like help them answer those questions when they've never done that type of work.
Miriam,
Yeah.
I'd like to comment. So what I really like about this exercise, I feel like a lot of my athletes who are going through transition or just retired feel really stuck. I mean, they're overwhelmed, but they're lost, but they're stuck. Like they know they need to do certain things, but they're unmotivated, they're depressed or whatever, right? And so I think stuck is a really good word. And what I like about this exercise, Kelsey, is that it, in an indirect way, allows you or want someone to focus on one thing that they can take action on today. And like, even I love the question, like, what would be the hardest thing to do? And then what's the easiest thing to do? And then that's like, when you can think of one easy thing to do, like Cohen, my smallest action to take to achieve this goal and easiest thing were the same as well. And it just makes you realize that you can take a small step. And by taking a small step, you can start to get momentum. And I think that a lot of the time athletes, in order to get unstuck, they do need to have their attention focused on something that they can have control over, and then take those small steps. And then with a little momentum, it picks up, and then it gets easier. So that I really like this exercise. So thank you.
Do you find that tackling smaller or easier challenges leads to tackling eventually the bigger one?
I can share.
Yeah.
Megan, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, so I absolutely believe, because I think it has a lot to do with momentum and building confidence, small steps, stacking habits. I think it all helps to build momentum and build confidence, which then leads to progress. So yes, I do.
What about you, Kelsey?
Agree. If nothing for just the confidence and motivation. And like I said, sometimes that end goal that they may have determined at one point might not be the goal anymore, or the progress that they want to be taking. So by taking those smaller steps, it just leads to a probably more accurate or more um, like a better place for them eventually. I can share my observation as well with working with athletes. I'm often surprised when starting coaching sessions. There's often a thought of, oh, I really just need to focus on my career, or I really, my well-being is really off. And what I have found in doing this exercise is they realize life is much bigger than the problem that they might be facing at the moment. So I think it provides some good grounding and just foundational awareness, and sometimes just that self-esteem boost and a little bit improved mood around, yeah, I do have a lot of great things that are going for me and things that really I could lean into that are fulfilling me and not just so focused on a single problem.
I think too, with the doing, or do you usually do these two exercises together, kind of like we did here? Okay. So I really like the having these two side by side, because on the life map, if you have some areas maybe where the number is higher than you would have thought, right? So let's say, family's high, but other things might be lower. For example, I really like the gratitude piece that's kind of evoked out of the life map. Right. And so then if you have that, kind of right next to the perspective wheel of the thing that you're working on, right, it just kind of makes things not seem so bleak and like, I still have these good things over here, even though I'm working on something else.
Kelsey, you mentioned at some point looking at the worst case as well and working off that. Is this something that you do often? I'm just curious also for the other coaches if that's something you have used. I know we have one of these exercises within our group coaching program as well.
I do. I like to do it just on my own. Even when I'm leading it, I'll go through it with the client as well, because it's a fun way of checking in with myself just to see, hey, where has there been improvement? Where have there been dips? What is it that I'm trying to strive for? I do want to hear from other people though. So if there's others that want to chime in, please.
Well, I have a few thoughts about the exercise, but I want to add something in relation to what we were talking last month about the retirement and the transition journey. Like which point on your transition from sport journey you are, because that will sort of determine your mindset as to how you feel or how optimistic you are about your future at the moment that you are in. And I feel like for me, those people who I felt like they really succeeded in sport, for me, like their way of approaching retirement was like completely different from what I was kind of going through sometimes, right? So I think it's important to know like where the athlete is at the moment when they're making those decisions. And then sort of like, have the information and kind of have, I should maybe give me an example. Okay, so I'm kind of getting lost right now, but I was trying to say one thing. Okay, about the fear of failure. Okay, so I think this is one of the critical things for me. Like I think certain goals I perceive as harder than maybe I would have in the past. And I think, if you're looking for goals right now, the chances are that you will find something easy and maybe steer away from something that's difficult to reassure yourself, that you can do it, that you can do that next thing. Yeah, and so that might be kind of a problem, right? If you're choosing an easy goal. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing, so.
Can I play devil's advocate there a little bit? So in the Designing Your Life certification course that I did through Stanford D School, we actually talk about setting the bar low and clearing it for our clients. So getting those quick wins, getting those easy wins is actually really beneficial. So instead of seeing them as like, oh, easy outs, maybe not as valuable, I'd argue that otherwise that setting the bar low and clearing it, because I first, as an athlete, when he said this to us, he taught us this, I didn't like it. I was like, wait, set the bar low? No way. I'm used to setting the bar really, really high. And my whole thing was like, shoot for the moon. And if you miss, you land among the stars. It was kind of like a saying I loved growing up. But it took me some time, and now I actually love it. And I love using it with my clients because it does help build confidence. It does help get those quick wins under your belt, which then gives you momentum and gives you some confidence and more motivation to set bigger goals. So that's just, I'd like to share that thought with you, just maybe to reframe that thinking. As an athlete, I think we always have these big lofty goals that we're setting, and it's okay to set smaller goals. We set smaller and short-term goals too in sports. So just food for thought.
Can I kind of second that a little bit? Just a kind of interesting thought as I've been listening to that, and specifically, Megan, just what you were just saying. You know, I think also one of the more challenging things that I've had to learn in regards to that specifically is to shift the locus of control for happiness and satisfaction. Because we have as athletes have kind of always been trained like you're always working to an external standard. You're working to make a coach happy, or you're working to generate a certain outcome in the arena of competition. I think one of the things that I've had to relearn is like that there is no coach for your happiness outside of yourself and your own values. So it's not as if you need to achieve some certain goal to meet a standard that someone else is setting. Ultimately, you know, if you are living consistently with your values and meeting the goals that you set for yourself, that's a win in of itself. You know, and kind of transitioning from being that super high achieving in every regard mentality to, hey, it's okay if I'm just satisfied where I'm at. And that's not saying that I'm not going to continue to work on areas that need improvement, but it's also not going to, you know, be something that kind of pushes me toward that hyper focused, like never satisfied, always working harder mindset that can drive us crazy.
But maybe that's the ultimate goal, if you think about it, is to do stuff to make us feel happy. Whether it was in sports or in life, I would think. But it's kind of hard for people to have that mindset because everything is so hectic and it's such a struggle. But if you can be intentional about, you know, tapping in and doing some self-awareness and some self-reflection and to understand that when you're happy and you feel good, you're usually you're at your best. So I think that would be a focus for people, even if they're in sports or just on their second career.
Thank you, Eric, for sharing that, because I think if we go back to the transition and that period of transition, I think trying to reconnect back to this happiness level is really important and is often forgotten. What I think athletes are trying to go to the next phase so quickly and find that next success so quickly that we often forget. How do you get better in that moment where it is a low time and it could, you know, often there's depression and loss and, you know, difficult emotions to deal with. How do we find moments of happiness within that space? So I appreciate you sharing that, Eric. I think it's really important.
What about the thought, and this is maybe way after the fact, if you drill down and try to get closer to the root, and this is after the fact, to break, I don't say a generational curse or a bad habit. When athletes are maybe in the mid-season or, you know, getting close to retirement, to have them start to think about that next life. A lot of them are not. So when they stop playing and things you got to start again. It's almost like there is a wreck. Like, oh, I gotta do these things. But if coaches or agencies will try to tap into the middle phase or getting towards the end to have to put emphasis on, hey, this will be ending soon. So it would be wise to start to think about what you're going to do next. So as you're getting close to the end, you already have some momentum in doing these things. You won't just be starting right when you stop. And that's a mentally and emotionally that is a struggle for everybody. So again, this is probably after the fact, but it's worth thinking about or trying to tap into.
Eric, what that made me think of is, let's say non-athletes, when you're in a job, trying to find a new job while you still have a job is so much more effective. It's easier. It takes some pressure off. You have some confidence, you already have a job and I'm just looking for another job instead of quitting your job and then trying to it's like a bigger barrier you have to overcome. So I like that kind of parallels the same thing.
Yeah,
I've been in both of
I
those.
just
I've been in both of those examples, and I've experienced the pressure on both of them. And is this something that you have to be cut? You have to be cut from a different cloth to be able to endure that. But that's a great point.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I think we need to look at again about the intensity of the life of an athlete. If they're finishing, typically they're finished with some big event. I mean, it's not always the case, but it is also the case that that's when it happens. And so I don't see how, you have any room to think about anything else if you want to finish strong. And it's kind of a compromise if you're thinking about something else at the same time as you're trying to do the best you can at what is the peak of a career, then I mean you have this problem to resolve, and I don't see who would help with that because coaches are going to be there to get the best out of you in the sport.
I think you make a
But that's
good
just
point.
one thing. That's just one thing. I mean, there are just thousands of other, aspects. So it's hard to for me to verbalize this because I would have to I think of all of it at once. And even with this exercise, it was hard to do it. It felt like I need to do it right, just to kind of have something to share on the call. But it's a good framework. I think it would be good to come back to it. But to do it from start to finish in, I had completely different categories, so I couldn't even compare. Yeah, so I mean, it's a trial and error for this exercise. But it's nice to have someone to, to have, to converse about that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I could go on.
I want to reflect on what you're saying because I think it's really important to acknowledge the fact that there are many different athletes and many different versions of us, right? And some people would be completely unable to think about anything else but their sport to be at the highest level. And others will actually benefit from thinking about other things to continue and to be at the highest level. And so I think we need to acknowledge every person functions differently. And this may be appropriate for someone and maybe not for someone else. And there's no right way to doing it. So I completely hear you when you say there is no time in the life of an athlete to do that. I completely agree with you that some people cannot. But I would argue that others need it. And I also think there is no right way of doing this exercise. There's only your way, and you can change it as you review it and do it at different stages in your life. So this is one tool that you do at some point, and you can redo it and do it again, not trying to find what is the perfect answer to it, but just what is the answer to it at this point in time, which will end up changing as you grow and change as well. Just to kind of a comment that as we go through this work, we all know there is no one way of doing this and assisting athletes, whether they're competing or retired. There is no one solution.
And Miriam, if I could just add that, like, I totally agree. I felt like when I was an athlete, so quite a while ago now, that I could not think of anything but my sport and achieving my goal. Like I was like all or nothing. And I now, when I work with my athletes who are actively competing, I encourage them that I really believe that's a misguided belief now. I didn't at the time, but I do now, because we know, and the research shows, in fact, the study from last month, the athlete transition study, shows that the athletes who think about their career after sport, they have an easier transition. So it's not, like you said, right or wrong, but we do know that those who do think about it and prepare, do some sort of preparation, it just eases their transition away from sport. So you can set yourself up for a smoother transition, I think, is the idea. But if it doesn't work for you and you really feel like you need to spend 100% of your attention on your goal, then you be you do you, right? So I think it just helps, that's all.
And the emotional development is different with an athlete who is 20 years old and someone who is 28. I found myself from personal experience, my first retirement was very difficult because it was at 22 and I wasn't prepared. And I wasn't equipped emotionally to deal with a lot of different things happening in my life. But when I got to 28 and I had a job and a sport and a family, I had more experience and I could handle more things at once. So you also build and develop towards that. You don't learn it over time. And something that may feel overwhelming at first, you learn to manage over time as well. Yeah, I really appreciate that you're asking those questions because it really fuels our conversation and you're the one who is closest to your athletic retirement. And so it's really important to hear your point of view and take on this. So thanks for sharing and challenging what we're saying here, because this is also how we grow. So really appreciate that. Kelsey, is there anything you want to add to the conversation, or anybody else as well?
I'll just add, thanks for the conversation. Thanks for kind of taking this journey with me.
Go ahead, anything you want to chime in before we-
I just want to say, I think I agree with everything that, Kat was saying and Megan that you were saying, and then Kelsey and Miriam. I think the key is, like Kelsey was saying, small pieces, right? Like take an exercise like this and just a small part. Like, so the one small thing that you might be able to do, it's too much to think of all of it, even for myself, who was way beyond my competitive career. Like when I was thinking about all these different areas, it was like, okay, wait a minute. So I totally, I empathize with where you're at, Kat. And I think just thinking about it in small, very, very small pieces and for a small period of time at first, to get yourself more comfortable with that transition.
So Kelsey, thank you so much. Thanks for sharing such a great exercise. Everybody, thanks for joining. We had a bit of a quieter group today, but I thought it was a very valuable conversation. So appreciate your participation. You all have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you for the next one. December will be our last one. A little bit of a recap for the year, but we'll send you some information ahead of time.